Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily, the Parkland school shooting.
I just want you to know I'm really sorry, and I hope you give me a chance to try to help others. It's your decision to decide where I go and whether I live or die.
We look ahead to next week's sentencing trial. Plus, the author behind a bestseller and highly anticipated movie is wanted for questioning in a 1995 murder case. And the death of Jayland Walker, what autopsy results reveal about his death.
We look at every single use of force. We look at the body cam footage. Officers have to explain why they used the force.
But first, the accused Buffalo supermarket shooter is indicted on dozens of federal charges. Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmire. 2 months after the deadly mass shooting at a Buffalo supermarket, the accused shooter is indicted by a federal grand jury. Back in May, 10 people were killed and 3 others injured when the 19-year-old gunman opened fire. In the days following the shooting, investigators revealed the accused shooter was motivated by racism, writing a manifesto that supported white supremacy. They say he specifically targeted black people inside the store. This week, a federal grand jury indicted the alleged shooter on 27 counts, including 14 hate crimes charges and 13 firearms charges. A statement released by the Department of Justice reads in part, quote, "The Justice Department fully recognizes the threat that white supremacist violence poses to the safety of American people and American democracy. We will continue to be relentless in our efforts to combat hate crimes." If convicted, the accused shooter faces a lifetime prison sentence or the death penalty. Right now, the Attorney General has not yet decided whether a death penalty sentence will be pursued. The suspect was also charged with first-degree murder and entered a not guilty plea just days after the shooting spree. On Friday, the Tops Friendly supermarket, the scene of the shooting, reopened for the first time. Joining us today is federal clemency expert and legal analyst Tammy Allison and co-host Terri Austin. Tammy, the shooter was already indicted in state court, so what's the difference with these charges?
With these charges, these are federal hate crime charges. So these have a higher penalty with the fact that this individual chose to perform this act of violence on the perceived notion that these individuals were Black. So with federal hate crime charges, it's typically race, their sexual orientation, religion. So something about a protected class of individuals is what the motivation is behind the defendant's crime. So with the federal hate crime charge in this situation, we know that that community was predominantly African American. So at the federal level, he has been indicted because of the fact that he chose this community because they're African American. And as we all know, with federal crimes, he would go through a federal court in terms of being prosecuted to eventually get a conviction and sentencing at a federal level.
Absolutely. Now, Terri, the death penalty will be decided later, but what factors will go into deciding that, and what do you think the answer should or even could be?
Well, this is definitely a death penalty eligible case. 10 people were killed, 3 were injured. It's a hate crime, as we've already discussed. It's very egregious. But I think the prosecutors and Merrick Garland himself, they're considering multiple issues. They want to look at the views of the victims' families, and there's already been meetings, and they are saying that they are in favor of capital punishment. So that's going to go into the consideration. But I think also civil rights advocates, those thoughts are going to be into consideration also. There's a moratorium on the death penalty, but that doesn't mean the prosecutors can't seek it. They still can.
Yeah. So at least for state charges, it's probably life in prison because it is New York State. But the feds can see the death penalty. We'll see what either decide as they progress in this case. Just 10 days after the deadly Buffalo shooting, a gunman opened fire at a Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Officials now say a police officer previously scrutinized for checking his cell phone was married to a teacher at the school. 19 students and 2 teachers were killed when an 18-year-old gunman opened fire at the elementary school. 17 others were injured. In the days following the shooting, first responders faced backlash for a delayed response as it took more than 1 hour to take down the shooter. Officials face additional criticism this week when surveillance video from the school was released, showing an officer checking his cell phone during the attack. A Texas state representative now confirms the officer was married to a teacher at the school. Ava Morales, she contacted her husband from her classroom while she was on the scene, saying she was shot and dying. The officer tried to move forward but was detained and his weapon was taken away. Morales died as a result of her injuries. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the author of a best-selling novel is wanted for questioning in a murder overseas. But first, autopsy results are released in the death of Jayland Walker. How officials say police officers involved will be investigated. Welcome back. Autopsy results reveal Jayland Walker, an unarmed black man at the time, was shot 46 times by Akron, Ohio police officers. On Friday, the medical examiner released autopsy findings saying Walker's June 27th death was ruled a homicide. At the time, officers pulled Walker over for a traffic violation. Body camera footage shows a foot chase as officers reported a weapon was discharged out of Walker's vehicle. According to a release from the Akron Police Department, the officers believe Walker, quote, posed a deadly threat to them. After that, they opened fire. Walker was pronounced dead at the scene. Later reports show there was a weapon in Walker's vehicle, but it was not on him when he was shot. Also, he had no prior criminal history. On Friday, the medical examiner noted Walker was hit 46 times across his entire body, including his face. The medical examiner noted Walker had injuries to his heart and lungs and died as a result of blood loss. This week, the chief of the Akron Police Department addressed the uptick in officer-related violence and the investigation process for use of force.
I'm not in any way, shape, or form minimizing what happened here on June 27th at all. That is just, we're going to look at what happened there. BCI is going to do their criminal investigation. We're going to do an internal investigation, as I've said since day one. But overall, when you look at the number of complaints that we've received in this city for officers, it's consistently since 2018 been around 50, 51, with a low year in 2020 being 36. Again, when you lay that over 150,000 contacts, I think in 1 year was 181,000. That tells you something about this police department and the officers that are serving this community. But we look at every single use of force. We look at the body cam footage. Officers have to explain why they used the force, and then decisions are made whether or not the use of force was within our policies or not. If it was not within our policies, then the disciplinary process will kick in.
Right now, the officers involved in Walker's shooting are on paid administrative leave as an investigation into the police response continues. Terri, initial reports were that Walker was shot almost 60 times. Even we reported that. What does the autopsy reveal about Walker's injuries and why we may be wrong or misguided?
Well, there's a difference between the preliminary findings, they're just that, preliminary, and the report that was signed by the chief medical examiner, Lisa Kohler. So we know that that is going to be and is more detailed and it's more thorough, and they're looking at each and every one of those wounds. And what Dr. Kohler said was that there were 41 entry wounds and 5 graze wounds for a total of 46. And the explanation between the initial preliminary finding of 60 or more and the 46 is that it is possible that some of those entry wounds might have had exit wounds as well. And so they might have been counted as additional wounds. But this is the report, and this is the one we should go by at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. Now, Tammy, a homicide by loss of blood from dozens of bullet wounds. There's no surprise as to the autopsy results, but what does having this information help in moving forward with this investigation?
I think having this information is going to actually help the officers that shot him. In this situation, it does seem reasonable to believe that they thought that he was still armed. There's no way of knowing if, in fact, he did make some shots out of his car when he was in the car, if he still did not have the firearm on him. But I do think that it's excessive, the amount of shots that the officers did on him that resulted in his death. It's extremely excessive. There's no reason why anyone needs to die by 40 plus bullets.
Absolutely. Well, we'll continue to watch this case as developments continue and make sure to give you accurate information as it's released. In Colorado, the state rests its case in the double homicide trial against defendant Kevin Dean Eastman, a man facing charges for the murders of his ex-girlfriend and her new love interest. Eastman is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with physical evidence for allegedly killing Heather Frank and local musician Stanley Scott Sessions on separate days in February of 2020. Frank and Eastman both had arrest warrants in connection to Sessions' murder before Frank's body was found. Prosecutors say Eastman slit Sessions' throat inside Frank's apartment and that Eastman fatally shot Frank in the chest twice to silence the only witness to the Sessions killing. They say he then hid her body near a burn pile on the property of his new employer. Investigators say Eastman burned Sessions' body and was allegedly preparing to burn Frank's body when he was arrested at a nearby gas station. On Thursday, a DNA analyst told to the jury no blood was found on several items of clothing, except 1 pair of pants.
I examined this for the possible presence of blood, and blood was indicated on the pants. I've circled the areas on the actual pair of jeans. When I visually examined it, I noticed a slight discoloration of a tan color in a pattern that I circled. Because I noticed this discoloration, because it was not the normal red-brown, like deep red-brown of a heavy stain, it was a light stain, which could have been diluted by, say, washing or some other method. The DNA profile that was developed from the cutting of the jeans indicated a mixture of 2 contributors. This is very strong support for the inclusion of Mr. Sessions on this pair of jeans. Mr. Bonnell, Ms. Frank, and Mr. Galejos are excluded as contributors to this profile.
Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, we head to Florida for the death penalty phase of the Parkland school shooting. Plus, the author of the bestseller Where the Crawdads Sing may have a connection to an unsolved murder, why she's wanted for questioning in Zambia. Welcome back. As Where the Crawdads Sing premieres in Hollywood, the author of the book the movie is based on is wanted for questioning in connection to an African murder. Author Delia Owens rose to fame with the release of the 2018 bestseller Where the Crawdads Sing. In the story, the protagonist stands trial for the murder of her lover. But in real life, Zambian authorities want to speak to the book's author about a 1995 murder she may have witnessed. At the same time, Owens and her husband worked as wildlife conservationists, working to protect elephants from poachers. ABC was on location shooting a story about the couple when gunshots rang out toward an unidentified man. When the story aired, the faces of the potential shooters were blurred. After that, Owens and her husband left Zambia and moved to Idaho and later divorced. Experts note there is no statute of limitations on murder in Zambia. Terri, what does it mean to be wanted for questioning? Are they suspects? Could they get arrested? Can they even refuse to show up?
Well, you know, getting questioned in Zambia is a little different from getting questioned here. Here you can question someone and try to figure out what's going on and get information. In Zambia, a suspect has the right against self-incrimination. And as a matter of fact, the government has to produce evidence against the person. They can't just have the person give them information. They have to have their own independent investigation. And interestingly enough, Brian, a confession is only acceptable in Zambia if in fact it's voluntary. So there's a lot of differences in the processes over there, but I would suspect that if you're asked to be questioned, you will go in and answer those questions.
Absolutely. Now, Tammy, rappers like Young Thug and Gunna in Atlanta are being prosecuted with their musical lyrics. With Where the Crawdads Sing having similarities to this murder, could a book be used in a same or similar way?
Of course, it probably should be. Let this Caucasian woman experience the same things that these African American men are experiencing in Atlanta. Use her words in her book against her, okay? Question her, question everything. Because, these are the things that good books are made of. So I do believe that the words that she wrote, in the same way that the lyrics that these individuals perform, can and should be used against her.
All right, so no rap songs or no books for me. I don't want anyone using my words against me in case there's any future prosecution. Well, also in court overseas, court resumes for Brittany Griner as the WNBA basketball player is being detained in Russia. On Friday, Griner's attorney brought forward a letter from a United States doctor urging the athlete to use medical cannabis for pain treatment. Griner has been detained since February after she was arrested at a Russian airport when less than a gram of cannabis oil was discovered in her luggage. While Griner pled guilty to the charges, she denies that she intentionally broke the law. On Thursday, the director of Griner's Russian basketball league testified, saying she has played on the Russian team for 7 years, acting as a leader and star player. Griner indicated she plans to testify in the trial, but says she needs time to prepare. A Russian judge previously ordered Griner remain in the country until the trial is concluded. She could face 10 years behind bars. When we come back, attorneys are in the final stretch ahead of the penalty phase for the Parkland school shooter. Still to come, hear who he argued should decide whether he's sentenced to life or death at his coming trial. Welcome back to Law&Crime Daily. A jury is selected in the California case that captured the nation 26 years ago, as Ruben Flores is tried for his involvement in the disappearance and murder of Kristen Smart. Ruben is charged as an accessory to Smart's 1996 disappearance, while his son Paul is charged with her murder. The two are being tried at the same time, but with separate juries. Paul and Kristen were classmates at Cal Poly when she disappeared more than 2 decades ago. He was allegedly the last person seen with her as they returned to the dorms from an off-campus party in May of 1996. Kristen's body has never been found, but she was declared legally dead in 2002. It wasn't until April last year that Paul and his father were arrested in connection to her disappearance. Opening statements in both cases are scheduled to begin on Monday. The trial is expected to last through October. In Florida, attorneys are in their last days of preparation for the penalty phase of the Parkland school shooter. It's been more than 4 years since the then 19-year-old opened fire on students and staff at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. 17 students and staff members were killed, while 17 others were injured. It took more than 3 months to choose a jury. A jury of 7 men and 5 women will ultimately decide whether the Parkland school shooter will be sentenced to life in prison or to death. The 12-person panel and several alternates will reportedly hear testimony from a witness list of nearly 2,000 people. In October of last year, the Parkland school shooter pled guilty to 17 counts of murder and 17 more counts of attempted murder, which prompted his case to head straight into the penalty phase. At that hearing, he said he felt the victims' families should decide his sentence.
I'm trying my best to maintain my composure, and I just want you to know I'm really sorry. And I hope you give me a chance to try to help others. If it's your decision to decide where I go and whether I live or die.
I'm not sure if you were talking to me or the victims' families when you said you. But you do understand the state of the law. I went over that with you.
Yes, I do.
And so you know that it's neither me nor the victims' families that are going to be in charge of imposing the death penalty.
I think what Mr. Cruz was saying was that ultimately in his heart he believes it should be the victims' families that make the decision about life or death. We have, however, explained to Mr. Cruz that it will in fact be the jury that will make that decision after the presentation of evidence of aggravators and mitigators in phase 2. Okay. This, I believe, is just his personal belief.
I understand.
It is in conflict with the law, but he understands the law.
Okay.
Opening statements are scheduled to begin Monday. Follow along for gavel-to-gavel coverage on the Law&Crime Network. Tammy, we can probably guess what the prosecution's opening will look like, but what could the opening be for the defending the Parkland school shooter look like?
I think the defense is probably going to try to rely on his age, But I don't think that would be the smartest strategy because the age of the victims in this shooting are around the same age as him or younger. And I just think that um, a criminal defense attorney has, a duty to zealously advocate on behalf of their client. But I really just don't see how anybody can zealously advocate on behalf of this criminal that conducted such a heinous crime. It's gross.
Well, we'll see it when Law and Crime covers the case, but I agree with you. You're really plucking out of the air for some kind of defense here. Terri, what do you think of the defendant's request to have the victim's family decide his fate rather than a jury?
It's an odd request, but in a sense, it makes sense because it's the victims who were really impacted. And arguably, you could say that they are the ones who would benefit or be harmed depending on what that sentence is. But the judge made it very clear that that's not the law in the United States. Here, a jury is going to decide whether or not you get the death penalty, and it'll be based on those victim impact statements. And you saw his attorney there explaining to him that that's a different thing from how you feel in your heart and how the law is applied. And the attorney tried to make it clear to the judge that he understood the difference between what's in his heart and what the law is. So that's very important.
Yeah, something that's necessary to go forward in the case. Well, Tammy, Terri, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.